Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on a very windy and blustery day, but it does definitely set the mood, does it not? I am very pleased and proud to welcome Tim Weisberg, local paranormal wonderkin. He's going to share with us today about some very interesting properties in the area, which I'm sure some of us are familiar with, hopefully. Want to start definitely by thanking the Friends of Westport Library for sponsoring this event today. If anyone is not a member of the Friends, very glad. Yes, very good. The Friends are responsible for the majority of our book budget as well as our programming budget. So anyone who is not already a supporter, please do think of doing so, because without them, we could not do all the amazing things and the more amazing things to come in the future. But you're not here to hear me, I'm sure, but you'd very politely listen if you needed to, but we won't put you through that. So that being said, Tim.
All right. Well, first, before we get started, everybody, let's just do this. Hold on a second here. I'm gonna hold this up and take a picture of everybody. I want everybody to say paranormal. Paranormal. Sorry, I have a countdown on my phone. I need time to prepare before I take a photo. All right, how's everybody doing today? Some of you know the right answer. The right answer is weird. How's everybody doing today? Weird. You can do better than that. How are you today? Weird. All right, well, you'll feel a little bit weirder by the time we get done. So, my name is Tim Weisberg. These are all the places you can follow me. If you haven't already, please do. As I always say, I'm very lonely. I work in front of a computer all day, and I love when people message me to talk about ghosts and other paranormal things, so feel free to do that. We'll also put it up on the screen again toward the end. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the host of Spooky South Coast on WBSM. How many folks have heard Spooky South Coast before? 1, 2, 3, 4. A new record. Great. We've been on for 18 years. I always love to tell the story that my parents will be sitting in the front row of one of these lectures, and I'll say, "Who listens to Spooky South Coast?" And they don't raise their hands. And I say, "What?" And they're like, "Well, we don't listen. We hear you talk enough. We don't need to listen." But that show is available on all the different platforms where you can find podcasts in addition to being on WBSM on Saturday nights. We've been on a hiatus for a while, since about May or so, April or May, because I had some changes at my day job. So by Saturday nights at 10 o'clock when we're on, I'm usually dead, no pun intended. But tonight we are going to be back. We're bringing the show back this evening just because I want to talk about the great crowd here in Westport on the radio, and also because there's some other breaking news we're going to discuss, which we'll actually talk about today as well. So there's about 700 or so episodes, so if you want to go get caught up, I can wait. And then, has anybody ever heard of Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell? That overnight show that used to be on for years? When Art left Coast to Coast AM, he started his own network called the Dark Matter Digital Network. And he picked Spooky South Coast to be one of the shows to be featured on that network. And when Art started that, he started his own show called Midnight in the Desert. And that show lasted with him as the host for, I think, 2 years. And then he stepped down due to some health reasons and some other issues. Apparently somebody showed up with a gun on his front yard one night while he was hosting the show. So he said, "That's it, I'm done." And he handed the reins over to his producer. Long story short, Art passed away. His producer didn't work out as the host. They hired my friend Dave Schrader to take over. And then when he was doing it, I would be his fill-in host. So if he had to go film the Holzer Files or whatever, I would step in and host for him. In January of 2020, I became the full-time host of that show every night for 4 hours. And then in April of 2020, new owners bought that network and said, "We don't want you anymore," because I wasn't going to promote their flat earth, 9/11 was an inside job, COVID isn't real, conspiracy theories. So we parted ways, and I started the Midnight.fm network and the show Midnight Society. So we're also on hiatus from that. We really after the pandemic was over and people were actually back to their regular lives, our listenership every night kind of waned. But we still have it out there for people to be able to listen to. Also, if you want to listen to me talk more, I'm the host of the Tim Weisberg Show every morning from 6 to 9 on WBSM. That picture was 60 pounds ago, but I still talk about all the same things, which food is a big topic that we discuss on the show. My work in paranormal radio led to me forming a company with Jeff Belanger. I'm sure many of you have probably seen Jeff speak at libraries before. Jeff and I started a company in 2009 called Legend Trips. And we started that company because so many of these paranormal places that are used for these events where people come out and go ghost hunting and pay, they buy a ticket to go ghost hunting. So many of these places are these really awesome historic haunts, and we're going to talk about some of them today. But people would go to them and they'd be so enamored by whatever TV star, celebrity was there as a special guest that they weren't really paying attention to the biggest star of the whole thing, which was the location itself. So we started Legend Trips with an idea of, no celebs, just putting the focus on the actual locations. And to date, we've raised about $50,000 for some of those places with our efforts. But my work in researching haunted places caught the attention of Nick Groff from Ghost Adventures. I went and I do too. I went out and filmed an episode of Ghost Adventures at the Lizzie Borden house with him, and we hit it off. And he said, "Hey, you're pretty local. Like, let's hang out and do some more stuff." So when he started the show Ghost Stalkers, he thought of me as the researcher and hired me to be the researcher for that show. And that, I like to refer to it as the 6 best episodes of paranormal television that you've probably never seen. But it is out there if you want to download it. I think you can get it online for like $2 an episode. So it's a $12 investment that I think you'll enjoy. Then that led to me working on the show Ghost Asylum as a writer, a researcher, and a producer. And then they morphed that show into something called Haunted Towns. And that was really cool to work on because I got to help kind of develop the concept and work on that as a writer, a researcher, and a producer. And a lot of people say, well, why do you need a writer for something that is supposed to be reality TV? And my job was actually to write the history and to find the people for them to interview and to get all of the backstory of both the location and the ghost. So all that stuff that's voiceover at the beginning of the show, before they actually go out and investigate, that's the kind of stuff that I would do. And then I would also get to write what they call beat sheets, which is where I would say, okay, now they're going to do this, now they're going to do that, now they're going to do this, which basically meant I got to determine exactly what they were going to do on their investigation so I could torture all the cast members as I saw fit. And what's interesting, I always like to point out that my work in television, I started off here when it came to financial compensation, and I ended up here. So you think that TV is this big glamorous industry, but it is not. I actually made more money per episode on Ghost Stalkers than the 2 cast members did. And they were forced to live in an RV outside these haunted places for 6 weeks. One of them, the guy on the left here, Chad Lindberg, is actually a Hollywood actor. He was in The Fast and the Furious, and he was on Supernatural. So you would have thought that he could have negotiated a better rate than the writer was getting, but whatever. So that's why I know so much about these paranormal properties, is because I kind of immersed myself in them. I actually got the chance to be on camera in a few things. There was a show called Hotel Paranormal, which is on, I think it's on Max now, but it was on the Travel Channel. It was actually produced by a Canadian company. And they had me as kind of one of the experts that talked about why hotels could be haunted and some of the specific cases. But the show was narrated, because it's Canadian, obviously, it's narrated by Dan Aykroyd, which is really cool because we share an IMDb credit now, which means that I'm actually an official Ghostbuster, as far as I'm concerned. And also, I'm on something called Famously Haunted Amityville on the Tubi app. They just re-released it. I got the chance to actually go to probably one of the most paranormal properties that I'd ever wanted to visit, the Amityville house in New York. When we were told that we could go there, they said, we're going to have you investigate. And we said, oh, we're going to get to investigate the house? Nobody's investigated the house since the 70s. And they said, well, we can't get you in the house, but we can get you outside the house. So my friend Stephanie Burke, who's a psychic medium, her and I went to Amityville to film, and we went to go investigate outside the Amityville house. But there's all kinds of signs out there that say no trespassing, no stopping, no photos, because people have made it, hard for the owners of the house and the neighbors to live their daily lives. So we rented a white Ford SUV because we thought that would make us look like the police. And we would go sit outside, and then when a car would come, I'd move, and we'd go around the neighborhood and come back. And this went on for 2 days. At the end of the 3rd day, we were partying with the producers, the rap party afterwards at the hotel, and I was telling that story to the head producer, and she says, oh my God, I didn't tell you? We got special permission from the police for you to stay outside the house and investigate. It's like, now you're telling me. So before we went home, I said to Stephanie, Stephanie wanted Pizza Hut. I don't know why. There was a Pizza Hut there, and she wanted Pizza Hut really badly. And I basically said, all right, I'll drive to Pizza Hut if you'll let me go to the house one more time. And then we actually did a real investigation outside in the car. but it was still pretty cool. And you can see some of that stuff on our YouTube channel and on our social media. So today we're going to talk about paranormal properties. You can buy a paranormal property, but you can't own a legend. Legends become bigger than the actual stories that are the truth behind them. I like to use the line from the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend. And a lot of these properties, we find out the legend does become bigger than the fact. And that's okay. The legend is just as important. I think in ghost stories, we get too wrapped up in what's true and what isn't true, and we get away from the idea of it just being a good version of storytelling. Now, I would never want you to present something as truth if we don't have proof that it's truth, but that doesn't mean that we can't still share legends and that they don't have some validity. So we're going to talk about some of these, and most of these are going to be New England-based paranormal properties. So we'll start with probably the most famous one. How many folks here have been to the Lizzie Borden house? Some of you have actually worked there at the Lizzie Borden house. But so this is probably one of the most haunted places in the world. At least it was when I was investigating it. I investigated this place over 24 times, and I've been there many, many more times than that. But there was a time when I guess not the first owner, the second owner, after it became a bed and breakfast, Leanne Wilbur, who owned it with her partner Donald Woods, they would let us do different events there all the time. But also, we were the people that Leanne would call when there were things going on that she felt were a little bit beyond the norm for the house. So I actually went there for the first time in June of 2006. We were going to have Leanne on the radio show, Spooky South Coast, to talk about it. And she said, before I come on to talk about it, you need to come to the house and see it for yourself. So she invited us to come on a Friday for the last tour of the day. I'm geeking out because the tour was given by Eleanor, who I knew from Unsolved Mysteries when they did the Lizzie Borden episode. But they take us through, we go on the tour, which was long, about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And at the end of it, they said, well, why don't you go poke around the house for a little while because you are the last tour. As long as you're out by, 6 or 7, we don't see a problem with it. And so my friend Matt Costa, who started Spooky with me, we poked around for a little while, but we didn't really have anything happen. And on the way home, I said to him, dude, I don't think that place is haunted. I didn't go as far as Steve Gonsalves did on Ghost Hunters, where he said, any place with a gift shop can't be haunted. That turns out not to be true. But I said, I didn't feel anything. I think it's just all marketing. I think it's all gimmick. So again, that was June of 2006. In October of 2006, a listener of Spookies from out in California came and rented the house out for her birthday, had the whole place to herself, and said, I want you guys to come investigate with me. And that was the night that I had my first paranormal experience in the Lizzie Borden house. It certainly wouldn't be my last, but that was the night that I actually had my legs lifted off the bed. I was sitting on the bed in the Hosea Knowlton room on the 3rd floor, and I was just taking a break while everybody else was investigating the next room over. There was an old sewing machine that operates with the foot pedal, and we had heard that go off on its own during some of our investigations. And on the episode of Ghost Hunters, they had heard a noise on the 2nd floor that they couldn't explain. So this particular night, we actually had some of the cast of Ghost Hunters there with us, just hanging out and investigating, nothing really serious. But they were trying to make that happen again. And I decided to go into the other room next door and lay down and take a little break. And as I lay on the bed, I was actually laying, instead of laying like you normally would, long ways on the bed, I was laying with my feet dangling over the side over here. And just because I didn't want to have to mess up the bed and have to, make the bed again. I'm terrible at making beds. So I'm laying there and I feel this cold spot developing over my chest and I feel this tingling sensation. So I called everybody into the room and they've got all the devices with them. They stand over me with a thermometer and they say, yeah, it's 10 degrees colder over your chest than it is on your body, which doesn't make any sense. My body heat should be rising. And yes, we are getting a spike in the electromagnetic field over you. So I said, if there is something here, can you kind of like show me your presence in a different way? Can you shake the bed? Can you knock on the wall? Can you lift my legs up? And when I said that, I felt 2 hands wrap around my ankles and start lifting my legs up. And they held my legs straight up for about 15, 20 minutes. Now, I know that this might confuse some of you. I'm not the most athletic guy in the world. I know looking at me, you think differently. But I could not keep my legs straight out like that for 15, 20 minutes. I don't have that kind of muscle control. But it felt like something was just holding them up. And then when it was done, I got up and I immediately said, somebody else try it now, because I didn't want to be the only one that it happened to. And it happened to multiple people again that night, and it happened to multiple people in the years since. So we've had a lot of different experiences in that house over the years. I've been growled at, I've been sworn at, I've been punched, I've been scratched, I've been thrown up against the wall, I've been thrown up the stairs, I've been thrown down the stairs. So needless to say, the ghosts there don't like me very much. But what I did find is that the more that I went there, the more it was building a case study. So I was able to kind of learn about how this operates and figure out some of the factors as to why. And so this is a place that was very open to paranormal investigators. Now, not everybody had the chance to go and investigate for free like we did, because we were just going to help out. But Leanne also did let a lot of people in there when they didn't have the money to get in there. If you asked at the right time of year and there was nothing else going on, you could get in there pretty cheaply, or maybe even just, buy some pizza for everybody. But there were a lot of investigations that happened there, and a lot of data that was collected. And to me, it stands as, because you can go to other paranormal places around the world where they have frequent paranormal investigation, places like Waverly Hills in Louisville, Kentucky, places like Bobby Mackey's. There's a lot of these famous places that have been open for years for people to go and investigate. But the problem I find with those is they kind of control the investigation a little bit. When you were at the Lizzie Borden house and you rented it out for an investigation, you had the place to yourself. The staff member would probably be outside in the barn. Nobody got in your way. And as long as you obeyed the rules, you could do what you wanted to do. So fast forward to January of 2022. When did mine start? 21 or 22? 21. All right, January of 21. I had just come back from filming the second season of Hotel Paranormal, and I'm returning my rental car, and my phone rings, and it's Leanne, and she's like, what do you know about a guy named Lance Zoll and U.S. Ghost Adventures? And I said, I don't know. I've never heard of that. I don't know anything about it. And she said, well, apparently he's a big ghost tour operator, and he wants to buy the house. Now, the house for years had not been on the market. People had called up with offers, and Leanne always said, we'll entertain the right offer, but it's got to really blow us out of the water. There's a great story. Are you familiar with the Jason Momoa story?
Yes.
I love the Jason Momoa story. There was a TV psychic who I will not name, who called the house one day and said that there was a famous person that wanted to buy the house. And Leanne said, well, say more. And basically, long story short, is this TV psychic had fallen for an online catfish pretending to be Jason Momoa, Aquaman. And supposedly, Jason Momoa was going to come to the house with his family and check it out and make an offer to buy it. Every time that Leanne tried to converse with Jason Momoa online, it was always like, oh, can we Skype? Oh, sorry, the camera's broken on my phone. Or like, if you're Jason Momoa, if you're Aquaman, you're a movie star, you've made all that money, Game of Thrones, all that stuff, you can afford to get a new cell phone. And if you can't, a cell phone company will give you one just for the plug. So it was really kind of shady. She would call me up all the time and say, well, here's the latest development. So as it turns out, this TV psychic got completely catfished. She got really jealous that Leanne was having conversations with Jason Momoa and said, you can't talk to him as much as you do because he and I are in love. And at one point, she actually put out on Twitter an online marriage certificate saying that the two of them were married, even though he was still married at the time to Lisa Bonet. So things get a little bit weird in the paranormal world that have nothing to do with the ghosts. But anyway, she said, I've got this offer. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over. They decided to put the house up for sale. As it turned out, her partner Donald was ready for retirement. Nobody in the family was ready to take it over. Nobody that would have taken it over could afford it. So, how much are you looking for? $2 million? I've got $2. And one of those I had to borrow. But so the property was put on the market, and it was purchased by Lance Zoll of U.S. Ghost Adventures. And this is being recorded. So I'm going to be very careful with the things that I say, but I will say I haven't agreed with all of the changes that have gone on there. Last year, on the anniversary of the murders, I visited the house. A friend of mine was staying there. And Lance took me through and showed me some of the changes. And, I just was polite and I nodded my head, but some of it I just don't agree with. And as a person who thought that everything was fine the way that it was before, I didn't see a need to have it changed. Now that's probably partially my own problem, because I don't like any change. In fact, I moved into an apartment, the walls were painted pink. I said, I'll just go get a bedspread that matches that, rather than paint the place myself, because I just don't like change. But there have been things that have shifted in the focus over there. It's become less about, in my opinion, less about the history and more about getting people to interact and post about it online. It's about getting TikTok videos. It's about getting YouTube videos. It's about getting social media influence into the paranormal community. And so some of the things that I've seen, I don't agree with. There was just an incident the other day where there was a video posted up on the Lizzie Borden House TikTok, on the US Ghost Adventures TikTok channel, where it was two people literally reenacting the murder of Abby Borden in the spot where Abby Borden's body was found. And that was my opinion on it. I just thought that was too far. So we'll get into a little bit more about some of that tastelessness in a moment. But this past August, on the anniversary of the murders, a coffee shop opened next door to the Lizzie Borden house. You probably read about this in the papers. I hope you read about it on WBSM.com. You probably heard about it on some of the TV news. So the gentleman who purchased this building his name is Joe Pereira, he always wanted to open up a coffee shop with a Lizzie Borden theme. He was telling me that he had this idea going all the way back to the 70s, and he just wanted to find the right location. He thought that he would get it launched when they were building the Fall River train station for the South Coast Rail. But then he said, you know what, I'd also like to have a coffee shop that's open to other people that aren't just the commuters on the train. And I think part of that, and I didn't ask him this, but my guess would be part of that is he realized maybe not as many people are going to use that train as we thought would. So I need to have another location where people can go to. So he purchased the building right next door to the Lizzie Borden house. This is the spot where, prior to the Borden murders, there was another offshoot of the Borden family that lived in the house that was on this property, and that's where Eliza Borden killed 2 of her children. She murdered them by drowning them in the cistern in the basement, and then went upstairs and slit her own throat with a razor. Those spirits were said to haunt the Lizzie Borden house, but Joe says that they were in the coffee shop too. I will say this now, I have experienced ghosts for a long time, and they are not a single physical feature that can only be in one place. When Maplecroft, we'll get into Maplecroft, but when Maplecroft opened up and people were investigating it, people would say, but I encountered Lizzie Borden here, but yet I also encountered her over at the murder house. How can a ghost be in 2 places at once? I'm sorry, why couldn't they be? What part of the physics of ghosts are you going to cite as the actual reason why they can't? So I do think you can have 2 ghosts in the same place at one time. However, same ghost in 2 places at one time. Strike that, reverse it, thank you. But what's interesting about this is not the ghost stories that have happened, but the way that the businesses have battled. Lance Zoll filed a lawsuit recently against Miss Lizzie's Coffee. This is after he had put out a press release stating that the coffee shop had agreed to change its name. And I reached out to Joe and I said, Joe, I'd just like to get your response for a story on the press release and the decision to change your name. And his answer to me was, what press release? The press release that says that you agreed to change the name of your business. I never agreed to change the name of my business. Well, as it turns out, Lance Zoll put out this press release and then didn't ask Joe about it first. So now, here's this battle starting between the 2 of them over this. It eventually ends up with the lawsuit getting filed for trademark violation because Lance says that he owns the name Lizzie Borden and any kind of use of it. Now, that's not true. I'm not a trademark lawyer. Is anybody here a trademark lawyer? Because I really want one to help me with this story, but no? Okay. I'm not a trademark lawyer, but I went through those trademarks. The trademark that he has, that he inherited from the previous owner, says that he has the name Lizzie Borden in relation to any restaurant or hotel. I don't see Lizzie Borden's name on it anywhere. He also claims that they stole his Hatchet logo. Now this is the Hatchet logo that they use. It's very crude. It looks like something a little kid drew. No offense to the person that designed it. But it's not the one that they have a trademark for. The trademark lists a very specific design. And you can't trademark just a generic item like that. It has to be a specific design. Otherwise, anybody that sold anything would be screwed because you couldn't have a picture of your own product if somebody else already had trademarked that product. So this is a very specific trademark that I don't think this case is going to go anywhere. And I think that they probably know that case isn't going anywhere, but they thought that they could bully their way into getting the coffee shop to change its mind. Joe said, nope, we'll fight this in court. So that's going to be a continuing battle. There's a lot of other stuff that's gone on between the two of them, but we'll just stick to the stuff that's out there in the public domain. But now they have announced that they have purchased a new property, the Villisca Axe Murder House, which it makes sense. If you own one of the most famous axe murder houses in the world, why wouldn't you want to own the other most famous axe murder house in the world? And so this case here, this dates back to 1912, so it's actually many years later after the Borden murders. However, there are some people that do theorize that if Lizzie Borden didn't commit those murders, and remember, she was acquitted, that maybe somebody who did commit those murders might have been somebody who was not from the town and had come in off the train. Because if you follow the train, and there's a gentleman who has, anybody here familiar with, oh God, why am I blanking on his name? Bill, from the Red Sox, Sabermetrics. Not Bill Lee. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. He was the guy that came up with all the stats in baseball, and then the Red Sox ended up hiring him, and he joined their staff. It'll pop into my head. But his hobby is researching axe murders and other grisly murders like that, other true crime. And he wrote a book called Bill James. Thank you. Yes, I knew it would come to me eventually. Bill James wrote a book called The Man from the Train, and it talks about how this person might have been on the train committing these different murders. And so others have kind of picked up on that idea and thought maybe the person who committed the axe murders in Fall River is the same person who committed the axe murders in Villisca. So it's possible, unlikely but possible. But in this particular case, there were 8 people that were brutally murdered with the blunt end of an axe, which imagine that. Imagine just somebody coming at you with an axe and then saying, you know what, I think I'll hit you with this side instead. And out of those 8 people, 6 of them were children. So there's a very big concern when you consider the thoughts and feelings that folks in the paranormal community have with what has become of the Lizzie Borden house, that this is now going to be the same thing, only now you're dealing with the murders of children. And I think I need to address something right here, because this is something that does come up, where people will say to me, well, Tim, how can you be against someone making a profit off these murders and making a name for themselves off these murders when you really do the same thing, don't you? You're out lecturing about them, you're on TV shows writing about them, you're bringing people into them, running events. Like, you also make money off of this. But the difference is, we're as respectful as we can be. If I ever went into, and yes, there's things that you could look at and say have been questionable. Every time we've done a Lizzie Borden house event, people have laid on the couch and they have come over there with the little hatchet that they keep in there and reenacted the murder of Andrew Borden. People do it for a souvenir photograph every time. So yeah, you could look at that and say, well, gee, you're being disrespectful too. But there's a line. There is a line, and it is something that you kind of have to judge by feel. And one thing that I can tell you is an easy line that you don't really have to have that much of an intricate feel for is when it's children. Children are pretty much a line that you don't want to cross. So we'll see what happens there. Now, my friend Johnny Hauser has been the paranormal leader over there at Villisca for a number of years. And he has said that, things are going to be done the right way. He's actually coming on Spooky South Coast tonight to talk about that. And then we'll see, what some of the plan changes are. But I mentioned that Maplecroft later was up for sale as well. So Maplecroft was the home that Lizzie Borden moved into after the murders. Her and her sister took the money that they inherited and they bought the house that Lizzie had always wanted to live in, or, the area that Lizzie had always wanted to live in the Highlands of Fall River. And they purchased this home. When the Lizzie Borden house opened, the murder house, which I hate using that term, but it's easier than saying 2nd Street versus, Maplecroft. But when the murder house opened up as a bed and breakfast, this was privately owned. And a lot of people wanted to get into this house. But the person who owned it I think there was I remember there was a newspaper article about it because I saw photos of it back in the early 2000s, but it was kind of run down. The person who lived there didn't really take great care of it. So when it finally did hit the market, it was purchased by somebody who wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Christy Bates, who lives in Texas, she wanted to turn this into a bed and breakfast just like the murder house. And she had to sink a lot of money into trying to get this place up to code and up to par for people to be able to go into it. And she did a great job, but eventually just kind of ran out of money and ran out of patience for some of what was going on. This is not in a business zoned area. So you can't have commercial properties in this neighborhood. We needed a variance for that in order to turn this into a bed and breakfast. She's an outsider coming into Fall River. I think we all know what Fall River politics are like, right? Maybe if she'd given Jazel a Batman Rolex, maybe she could have gotten it done. But it was very hard. She was up against the wall. And so she ended up selling the property to Donald and Leanne, who continued on with those efforts. Did things like installed sprinkler systems and brought it even more back to the way that it would have been during Lisbeth Borden's day when she lived there. But again, as time goes on, you realize things aren't going to work out the way that you want to, so they ended up putting that house on the market and sold that. That actually sold after the murder house did, but it went to a family, and now a nice family lives in it. And so please don't go show up on their lawn and look in their windows and knock on the door and ask if you can come in and look for ghosts. The next place we'll talk about, I think folks have become more and more aware of this over the years. How many folks have seen the Conjuring movie, the first one? You'll notice this doesn't look anything like the house in the movie. That's by design. When they made the movie, they really didn't want people to start showing up on the front lawn of this house, but they did. They found out via the internet where this house was, and people started showing up. So the Conjuring movie tells the story of the Perron family, who in 1971 moved into this home in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and almost immediately literally immediately began having paranormal experiences in that house. Things of a wide variety of nature that the movies don't even touch upon. In fact, if you ask Andrea Perron, who's the one who's kind of led the way and written the books about it, and you can ask her, she's going to be in Middleborough on the 29th. But she will tell you this real stuff that happened, nobody would ever put into a movie because Hollywood would say people will never believe that. And that's what they endured living in that house for 10 years. Well, when they sold the house, it came in under the ownership of a woman named Norma. And Norma later tried to say that the Perron family were full of it. What's interesting is she would go around telling people that the house wasn't haunted. Yet there's an episode of the TV show Ghost Hunters in which she contacted ghost hunters to come and feature her haunted house on television. And also there were other things that would go on there that proved that she knew that it had that reputation and that she had no problem with it until the movie came out and people started showing up on her front lawn. Which, granted, I wouldn't want either. So she was dealing with that for so long, and she said, you know what, I'm sick of this. She put the house on the market, and then it was purchased by two paranormal investigators from Maine, Corey and Jen Heinzen. And Corey and Jen bought this with the idea of they would want to eventually live in this because they wanted to live in an old farmhouse like this, and that they would also have it be a place that people could come and investigate. Now, I've made this joke to them already, but I don't know about you. I don't like anybody coming into my house that knows me, let alone letting people come in to where I live to come and tour it and investigate it. But, kudos to them that they thought that they could deal with that. They never really did get to the point where they officially moved in, but they were going back and forth between Maine and Harrisville, and they would stay in this house for prolonged periods of time. Their daughter helped them with it as well. But Corey is a military veteran. He served in Afghanistan, I believe. And he has PTSD. He's not shy about it. He talks about it. And so what was happening is as these people were showing up on the front lawn when he was in charge of the property, he found that he was having more and more issues being able to control himself and getting these people to leave. And he became afraid that one of these days he was going to snap and he was going to hurt somebody. And I don't know if you can tell from that photo, he's a big guy. And he would hurt somebody. He would do some damage. So for his own mental health, they had to put this place in somebody else's hands. Now they're still there, they're still helping out. Corey still leads tours there all the time. But they were lucky enough to find the right person to purchase that home with Jacqueline Nunez. The Conjuring House story has become one of those things where the legend has become the fact. In the movie portrays Bathsheba Sherman as a witch who murdered her own baby and then haunted this home and terrorized the Perron family. In actuality, Bathsheba Sherman is just a name of someone who lived in town who they don't even know ever even stepped foot on that property. It was a name that was given to the Perrons when Ed and Lorraine Warren were investigating the case, and it's a name that Lorraine Warren had come up with and told them how she was a witch. And this whole thing just got blown out of proportion to the point where people have gone to the cemetery and vandalized Bathsheba's grave. They recently raised funds to buy her a new headstone, of which Jacqueline was the biggest contributor. But this story has kind of gotten out of control because of the movie. But the story isn't true. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the movie that isn't true. They took an existing script for a horror movie. They took the story of the Perron family and they kind of mashed the two things up. So a lot of, the clapping game and all that stuff, it's all fabricated. But the end result has been when the Heinzens took over and they let paranormal folks come in, there was a lot of negativity that happened. There was a lot of darkness around that house and in some of those experiences. When Jacqueline came in, she has a completely different approach. She's not a paranormal person per se, but she's a spiritual person. So she was looking very much toward a more, it sounds cliche, but more of a love and light approach to things. And the house has responded. I never investigated the house before her ownership, but every time I've gone there, I can only say I've had very positive experiences. Has stuff been a little bit creepy and a little bit weird? Yes, absolutely. But it feels like everything is coming from the right place. And the only way I can describe that is I've been through enough of this, and I've been through enough of the negative stuff that I can kind of tell. It's like a little bit of discernment. And she has brought Andrea back into the home quite a bit to help with the investigations. Also, Satori Haas and Cody Despians are also two people that are there quite a bit, and they've helped bring a lot of that positivity back as well. Satori is the daughter of Jason Haas from Ghost Hunters, and I've known her and Cody forever, and they just are amazing people, and they put a lot of positivity back into that house. So if you ever wanted to go there and take a tour, but you were kind of afraid because of the stories that you'd heard, don't be afraid. It's like $25 to take the tour. They bring you all through the house. It lasts a couple of hours, and you even get to poke around and investigate a little bit afterwards when the tour is over. And it's during the daytime. So if you're really afraid, when you walk outside, the sun is shining. Although don't book a late tour this time of year. It might be dark when you leave. The S.K. Pierce Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. This was featured on Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures. It's also known as the Haunted Victorian. This is a place that was under the ownership of a guy, I can't remember his name, but he had originally reported having some paranormal activity happen there, and he called in Ghost Hunters to come and investigate it. So it was on an episode of that show very early on. He ended up selling that house to a couple. But before we get into the experiences they had, let me give you just a little bit of the backstory of this house, because you probably haven't heard about this as much as you have these other places. The S.K. Pierce Mansion was built by Sylvester K. Pierce, who was one of the wealthiest residents of Gardner back when it was known as Chair City. They made chairs. That's what they were famous for. What's funny is Winchendon right next door is Toy Town. So you had chairs in one place, toys in the other. I mean, talk about a shopping trip that kids would get bored with if they were hopping up in their horse and buggy. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to Toy Town. Ah, she turned into Chair City. Ah, damn it. So anyway, Sylvester Pierce built this great mansion, and it was right across from his chair factory. He lived there for a short time before his wife passed away, and then later he passed away. And it ended up in the hands of his son. His son was not the best character in this story. He would always have people of ill repute in the home. They would gamble. They had a pool table on the third floor. People would come to play pool. They would bring women up there and force them to do things against their will. It was a very dark time for that place, and it left a negative stain on the property. Eventually, he lost the house in a card game, and it became a flop house where people would come and stay. There was a person who actually died there, supposedly of spontaneous combustion, although that's never really been proven. And there have been women who were murdered there. There's been a lot of different things that have happened over the years. It had a very dark history. And in fact, that dark history really hasn't gone away. There was a lot of darkness still surrounding that house when I began investigating it in the 2000s. So the person who owned it when all this stuff really came to light then sells it to Edwin and Lillian Gonzalez. They are a couple who are looking for a Victorian home because it's been Lillian's dream to live in such a place. And so they find this fantastic deal on this Victorian mansion in Gardner, and they say, how can we pass this up? I think it was something like $280,000. So if you can buy a giant mansion like that, I know it looks like something from out of the Munsters, but you're going to buy that all day. It did need a lot of work, but they were confident that they could pay for the repairs that it needed. What happened, though, is when they moved in, this activity started targeting them. And so a lot of this negativity started happening in particular to Lillian. And she found that she was having these horrible dreams. And she couldn't or wouldn't go to sleep at night because these dreams made her life such a living hell. Finally, she got to the point where she said to Edwin, I can't live here anymore. I have to live somewhere else. I don't care if we have to sell the place, but I can't live here anymore. They actually ended up getting another place a couple of hours away. And that's where they lived when they still owned this place and they were trying to unload it. He actually called me up and he said, Tim, I got the deal of the century for you. You want to buy the place? $240,000. And I said, I can't move. At the time I was married and I had a young son, I was like, I can't move my family into that place knowing what's going on. Also, I don't have $240,000. But I was less worried about that part as much as I was like, I can't let my family live in this house knowing what you're going through. So they ended up putting it on the market, and it was purchased by a couple from New Jersey. And Rob and Allison Conti are fantastic people. They are the nicest people in the world. Rob's a dentist. I mean, you couldn't get any more straight-laced than these two. They run all their kids' youth sports leagues. They're just fantastic people, fantastic parents. But their hobby is they own a haunted attraction down there in New Jersey called, I think it's called the Dark Carnival. It's a haunted house attraction where they bring people in on Halloween, they scare the crap out of them, and that's what they do for fun. So they bought the mansion with the intention of turning it into a year-round haunted house experience like that. So you can always go in, pay your $20 at the door, whatever they charge, go in there and there would be live actors jumping out in costumes, scaring you, and they'd have all these different rooms. But when they got to the house and they started spending time in the house, they quickly realized, we can't do that to this house. We need to keep this as it is and just improve it and make it better. Now that photo of it, it looks beautiful in that photo, but it didn't look beautiful for a long time. It was falling apart, and Edwin and Lillian really never did keep it up as much as they thought they would. So it turned to Rob and Allison to really invest all that money into building it back up. And I'm happy to say that over the last year or so, they've been able to put all the finishing touches on it. They opened it up now for day tours for the history every single day. And they finally gotten to the point where people can stay there overnight as a bed and breakfast style place. It was so dumb. The last time I was there, they were ready to let people stay. Everything was ready. When I first started going there, they didn't even have toilets that worked. When we would do events there, we'd have to rent a porta potty and put it on the front lawn, which I did an event there in November, like after Thanksgiving. It's not fun having to go outside and use a porta potty in late November. But they got everything ready to go. And the only holdup was the town said they had to get the driveway graded properly before people could stay there. They said, we're not even going to let people park in the driveway. It didn't matter. So they finally got that done, and now everything's going the way they wanted it to. But they put a lot of time and effort into that place, and I think the place has responded with a change in the attitude and a change in the atmosphere. There is a lot more positive activity that happens there now. And I think that's because they know that the people who own it love it. Not that Edwin and Lillian didn't love it. I just think that they were in over their heads with where that place was paranormally at the time, which is what can happen. People will look at the Amityville house and say, well, only the Lutz family had experiences in that house or claimed to have experiences in that house. No other family that lived there ever did. So it must not have been haunted, and the Lutzes must have made it all up. Well, maybe, but that also doesn't really necessarily ring true. Every family that moves into a place is different. And every family brings their own baggage as part of that, and that might be attractive for whatever the paranormal activity is there to zero in on. My aunt and uncle bought a haunted house when I was a kid. And every family that had lived in that house from the 1960s to the 1990s, the couple had ended in divorce. And my aunt and uncle got really close. My aunt moved out and didn't live with my uncle anymore. Was actually seeing somebody else. They got that close. And then something happened where they said, you know what, let's just meet up, not at the house, let's go meet up somewhere, sit down, talk it out. And that was 25 years ago, and they're still together to this day, and more in love than anybody that you know. In fact, it's kind of gross. I'm like, you're in your 60s now, can you stop? But they survived, they made it through, and they had every bit of haunting that everybody else did, but unlike those other families, they didn't let it break them. They were stronger than it could break them down. So we're going to talk about now, instead of owners of some properties, some people who are advocates for paranormal properties. This is my friend Christy Parrish. She's in charge of the Oliver Estate in Middleborough. Has anybody been to the Oliver Estate? Has anybody seen it on TV? It's been on Kindred Spirits and Paranormal Lockdown. This was another location that was falling apart. It was a dump. The town of Middleborough owned it. They didn't know what to do with it. They were ready to raise it because it's a pretty attractive piece of property. So we were able to start having paranormal people come in and investigate. And through the paranormal, they raised enough money to be able to not only refurbish the place, but to make it better than it had been since the time that the Oliver family lived in it. So now you have not only a place that the town can utilize for different events. They put on like afternoon teas and historical tours and all these different things. But now the paranormal folks can come in on a regular basis. They do investigations for newbies who have never done it before. They do investigations for seasoned investigators. You can rent the place out for the night. They also let people like me come in and put on events. So we've realized that over time, this house has responded. Because Christy has put so much time, energy, and love into it, those spirits have made a very direct connection with her. And the people who come back again and again and again, they have those experiences as well. I've had shadow people in the basement that I've experienced. I've had all kinds of weird phenomena happen, weird light anomalies that show up. We had a door handle that moved on its own. Just all kinds. We had a picture that flew off the wall when it couldn't have possibly have fallen off the wall. There's so many things that have happened there. And it's because they know every time that we do something, that's going to bring more people into the house, which is going to generate more revenue, which is going to make them rebuild this house and have it be the way that we want it. And Christy actually has now taken over another property too called the Emery Estate, which is owned by the town of Weymouth. And she's doing the same thing with that place. And that place is another spot where the activity has really responded to the people who come in and want to have an experience, but are also giving up a few dollars out of their pocket so that they can refurbish it. This is Matt Warner. He runs a place called Heartstuff Hall in Rockland. This is another spot where, this is a place where they didn't know what to do with it anymore. And they thought maybe it's haunted. Matt goes in and investigates it, realizes that it is haunted, and then they realize that we can use this as a way to raise important funds that we need. He's actually taken over another place as well, but I can't remember the name of that place. Ken DaCosta of Rise Up Paranormal has been somebody who has been going to the Paint House in Coventry for many, many years, and he holds events there to help with the upkeep and the maintenance of this historic location. Ken is also one of the big supporters and a big friend of Jacqueline at the Conjuring House, and he does a lot of things over there as well. In fact, I probably wouldn't have gone into the Conjuring House if it wasn't for Ken, because Jacqueline was a little bit nervous about some of the people in the paranormal and the outsiders. Ken vouched for me as being a good person, so I thank him for letting me get in there. And we've gotten along great. He lives just one town over. He lives in Tivoli. So we've been working together for a long time on things. So now let's just get into some paranormal property myths and truths. This is the fun stuff here. I should buy a paranormal property. I like to quote Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park. Just because you could, you didn't think about whether or not you should. Like, that's what goes on with a lot of people who think that they should buy these places. There is a lot that goes into owning a property that has a rumored story of being haunted. There's a lot that goes into it from a completely non-paranormal side. Think about the problem that Norma dealt with owning the Conjuring House. All these people showing up on your front lawn. Think about what you're gonna have to deal with, phone calls and emails from people who are on paranormal teams who say, I wanna come in and investigate. And then you say, okay, well, we charge this much money for you to come in and investigate. And then they say, oh, you're such a money-grubbing jerk. I don't do this for money. I do this because it's what I love to do and I want to help people. Okay, I like to help people too, but I also don't like to have people come into my property without paying me for it. So that's one of the real big rubs in the paranormal community is that the folks who do the investigations seem to think that the people who own the properties owe them something. Because we don't charge for investigations. We pay for all this out of our own pocket. Great. I like to play wiffle ball too. I go out and buy all my own equipment to play wiffle ball. I went out and bought a wiffle ball bat and a ball and a glove. I don't show up at Fenway Park and say, you guys should let me play wiffle ball, right? So there's this idea of that they owe you something is a huge myth too. I own the property, so everything goes through me. This is something that we're seeing happening not that far from here, at a paranormal place that's right down the street in Fall River. I'm aware of the camera, so I'm trying to not get myself sued here. But there are people that own some of these places that say, anybody that has an experience, I'm the spokesperson for this place. So aside from that location, I know of other paranormal places where the owner has told staff and people who have investigated, no matter what you get in this place, if a TV show calls and they want somebody to talk about it, I'm the one that goes and talks about it. So even though they want your personal experience, you have to have this spokesperson speaking on your behalf. And that's a big problem, is when you start managing that to that degree, you're taking away some of the truth and some of the power of the truth in these stories. I can control the narrative. As I said at the beginning of this, you can buy a paranormal property, but you can't control the legend. You can't say, I own everything associated with this, and therefore it's only going to be the version of the story that I want told. When people come in and they have their own experiences, those experiences are their own, and they're their own story to tell in the way that they want to tell them. I've had to deal with this for a long time when it comes to some of the false things that I know that are out there about places, but I've kind of bit my tongue on it because I can't stomp all over somebody else's experience if I wasn't there. So when people show me photos of an orb, I used to say, well, that's probably dust or a bug or moisture. And they would say, no, that's Aunt Tilly, can't you tell? So what I've decided to say is instead, they'll say, here's an orb. I'll say, well, what do you think it is? I think it's my Aunt Tilly. Well, maybe. And that's where I leave it. Because you can't control someone else's narrative. And the other part of that, too, is I'm not there when all these things happen. So, yes, it pains me to no end that there are people who went to the Conjuring House and swore that they encountered the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, and she did nasty things to them while they were there. I know in my heart of hearts that that's not true, that it wasn't Bathsheba Sherman, but at the same time, I wasn't there when it happened, so I can't say for sure. I can make sure we separate fact from legend. Yes, you can make sure that people know the facts that are out there, but unfortunately, you can't separate the two. The legend does become the fact. All you can do is just keep reminding people that, well, here's what our research shows. The story of the gentleman who died from spontaneous combustion at the S.K. Pierce Mansion is a famous example of this. Over the years, there's been a lot of things that have proven that it probably wasn't spontaneous combustion, that it probably was maybe an electrical fire that happened. What happened was he was sitting in the chair, and, I'm sorry, not an electrical fire, a cigarette fire. He was sitting in the chair, and all that really burned was him and the chair and not much of the space around it. So people are like, he must have spontaneously combusted. Well, in actuality, what probably happened is he probably fell asleep smoking and lit the chair on fire, and the chair caught on fire and he burned in the chair, and by the time somebody got into the room, they were able to contain the fire so it didn't get beyond that spot. But the legend becomes fact, and it's the place where somebody spontaneously combusted. Even though there's no real scientific proof that anybody has ever spontaneously combusted. And again, it's what I call the Liberty Valance effect. When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend. Is everybody familiar with that movie? If not, go and watch it. It's a great film. You have a responsibility to the paranormal community. We covered that before. in terms of like people that want to come in. But just because you own a haunted place doesn't mean you have to ever let anybody investigate it, period. The nice people who bought Maplecroft, I'm sure everybody in the paranormal that didn't get in there wants to still get in there. They don't owe it to anybody to let them in. It's their property, it's their choice. And they owe it to us because we do this for free. That's the lamest excuse I've ever heard. So now that we've talked about some paranormal properties, who wants to come and explore some of them with me? Oh, don't all raise your hands at once. We have a couple that are coming up, and before I tell you about the first one, I have something very exciting to share with you. My friend Stephanie Burke, who is a psychic medium out of New Bedford, and her boyfriend, and probably my other best friend, Scott Porter, they have a brand new TV series. It just debuted yesterday. It's on the Fox Nation streaming app. I know there's groans for two reasons. One, Fox Nation. Two, because it's another streaming service that you're not paying for. They have a free 1-week trial that you can sign up for, and there's only 6 episodes of the first season, so you can binge them all. They were all released yesterday, so you can binge them all. So don't feel like you have to, subscribe to something else when you've already subscribed to so many other things. But this show is them investigating one particular location over the course of many weeks. So I'm going to play the trailer of it for you, and you can get a feel for what we're talking about.
There's something here. People died here, not everyone left.
It really is an asylum.
Eloise Asylum was a living hell. Thousands of patients died. Those dead never left. You can't understand the haunting without understanding the history. This place has all the markings of a dangerous haunting. I want to find out exactly what they've experienced.
All right, I'm trying to connect. Can you tell me what happened here?
That's a noise.
It sounds like a woman singing.
So you here with us?
Wow, my hand just got cold. That's weird. It's starting to feel like we're picking a fight
Something rushing up behind me.
with something we shouldn't be messing with.
I wasn't driving the ship. I was in control.
There's someone in that hallway right now. I don't know if I can take being in here much longer.
Hey guys.
Are you okay?
It's made us question everything. And the deeper we get, look at this.
The haunting started here before Eloise was here.
The more I have to wonder, are we the ones looking into Eloise? Or is Eloise looking into us? Something's done.
Oh my God, you're bleeding.
We need to get everybody out of here now.
Secrets of the Asylum, streaming now on Fox Nation. Sign up at foxnation.com.
I'm a little freaked out.
So, there's also going to be a watch party next week at the Alley Theater in Middleborough. Stephanie and Scott will both be there. They're going to be doing like a Q&A and like a little bit behind the scenes stuff, and then they're going to show the first episode. So if you want to get tickets to that, if you go to WBSM.com, I have an article about her, and there's a link in there to be able to purchase tickets to that. But maybe, you heard them talking about the Eloise Asylum, maybe you want to actually go to the Eloise Asylum yourself and check it out with us. So Stephanie messaged me, we talk over Facebook Messenger. It's pretty much the only way we communicate. It's so weird, but that's how I talk to people. And she sent me a message one morning and said, do you want to come with us for an event we're doing at Eloise Asylum? And I was like, I've never heard of Eloise Asylum. I knew that her and Scott had filmed a TV show, but they signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, so they didn't really tell me anything. All they would do is just keep giving me teases. Wait till you see this, you're not going to believe it. So I didn't know that that's where they had gone to film. So I was like, I don't know anything about Eloise Asylum. You'll have to tell me more. And she's like, I will, but it's out in Detroit. Do you want to come with us? And I said, of course. Love to go with you guys. So that was on a Friday morning. That same afternoon, I was giving a presentation to the Lakeville Senior Center. And at the end of my presentation, I'm packing up and I'm going to walk out, and a woman grabs my arm and says, have you ever heard of Eloise Asylum? And I looked at her and I said, why would you say that to me right now? And she's like, what? I just found out about it, and I thought I would ask you if you've ever been there. I was like, no, I've never been. And so I called Stephanie on the way home, and I told her, I was like, this happened. She's like, yeah, get used to it. Like he says in there, are they looking into Eloise or is Eloise looking into them? She says it will look back at you now that you've agreed to go there. And then later on the next week, I do that morning show on WBSM where we don't usually talk about paranormal topics. Sometimes it comes up, but we're talking about some other local politics or local news. And a guy calls up and he says, hey, listen, I know this is off topic, but can I ask you about the Eloise Asylum? I'm like, all right, now I'm getting freaked out a little bit about it. And now it's only going to get worse because the show has been released. But we are going to be going to the Eloise Asylum November 17th. It'll be myself and Stephanie and Scott. After watching I've seen the first 2 episodes of the show. I just fell asleep and didn't get to watch the rest. I'll do that later. But I definitely cannot wait to get there and experience some of this for myself. The show is so good. It's very very cinematic. And it looks like you're watching a horror movie. And the pacing of it is really good. And it actually got to the point where I texted Stephanie and I said, Stephanie, you got to tell me the truth. That woman singing in the hallway, was that real or did they add that in later? And she's like, everything's 100% real. You know me better than that. If they added anything onto the show, I would have walked off of it. So that alone has me intrigued to see what else it'll give us on that particular night. So you can use that QR code there, or probably because it's on the screen. That's probably why. Probably because it's projected. But anyway, it's also in that story at WBSM.com. There's a link to be able to purchase tickets. And then I mentioned the Emery Estate in Weymouth. We'll be going there December 9th. I want to get them one more event on the books before the end of the year to help with their fundraising efforts. And also because I can't wait to get back there after the last experiences I had there. I was there in July. You were there in July, right? That's the one. And we had a lot of weird things that were going on. Now the family that lived there, the Emerys, were a very religious family. And they were followers of Reverend Billy Graham. Reverend Billy Graham actually stayed in this house numerous times over the years. And the Emery family spirits that are still there are always trying to help with the investigation. They're always giving us activity. The first time that I went there, I had something put its hand on my shoulder. And I said, okay, well, can you touch my other shoulder? And I felt then 2 hands on my shoulder. And I said, can you rub my back then? Because I could use a massage. And it started massaging my shoulders. So I figured it probably liked me. I knew it for sure the next week when the next team that went in caught an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recorded voice, that said, where's Weisberg? So I'm like, well, if they want me to come back, I'll have to come back. And so the last time we were getting a lot of stuff that was coming through a device that we use called Echo Box, which it's not like a ghost box where it's a broken radio and it just keeps spitting out words. This only has phonetic sounds. It doesn't have any words programmed in. So the ghosts have to grab those phonetics to be able to spit out entire words. And what I found on that particular night was we may have got a few religious things in other rooms, but when we went into the Billy Graham room, it was like we were getting a sermon. It was just nonstop stuff that was all religious. And then after everybody left for the event, it was just myself and Christy and Rick, the guy who helps her take care of the place. And I'm talking to Christy while Rick's putting stuff in the truck. We're in the parlor, and all of a sudden one of the shades on the window just goes and rolls up. Which could be anything, but it was just weird enough to make us take a moment. Then Rick comes back in and he goes, hey, who's upstairs? Nobody, it's just us. He's like, well, I hear footsteps and voices up there. So Rick and I go up the stairs and we're walking through the second floor and we can hear heavy boot steps and we can hear voices murmuring. And then we go up to the third floor, we hear the same thing. And this went on for about an hour. And then finally we're like, we gotta go home. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, we gotta get out of here. And as we were going downstairs, Rick hears a female voice in his ear say, close the door. And he's like, oh, that's right. I left the sun porch door open to the second floor sun porch. So he went over there and he closed that door. And I heard a female voice when he did that say, thank you. So I'm looking forward to getting back there on December 9th and seeing who these people might be that were talking to us that night. So if the code doesn't work for you on there, you can always come up and see me and scan it on my computer, or you can just go to spookysouthcoast.com/events and get your tickets there. So we always do for my events, we always like to provide people with a pizza dinner. Beforehand, we do pizza and salad. We have chips and cookies and all kinds of snacks. We have water and soda. We do this because we've gone to so many events ourselves where you'll pay whatever you pay to get into this ghost hunt. Sometimes, $200, and then you'll say, oh, can I have a bottle of water? And they'll say, yes, they're $4 each. And so we just decided we're just going to make everything inclusive with our events. So, all right, one more time, all of my information on the screen for you to follow me. And I thank you all for listening to me as I rambled on about ghosts. Does anybody have any questions? Threats?
Not a question. As you know, I'm the realtor who sold Lizzie Borden House and Maplecroft and was a consultant for the sale of the Conran House. I've got some pretty cool pictures of that I took at Lizzie Borden's. You won't see them online. They are my personal pictures of some pretty wild stuff that I've seen. So if anybody wants to see that when you're done with the Q&A, I'd be happy to share.
Yeah. We also have, I'm going to put her on the spot, we have Erin over here who goes by the Surrealtor. So that's, if you two don't know each other already, you really need to.
I'm like, lived experience, you know, when you have
You didn't
a
experience
property
anything.
like that, that has
Nothing?
the reputation of being haunted, you have to disclose it
If you know.
if you know. So it could be a private situation that's been kind of low key, but if you know that it has to be
It
disclosed.
depends on the state.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, you do not disclose it unless somebody actually asks you. Then you
Okay.
cannot lie about it. But I can't go around saying, oh, there was a suicide in this room, and, you know, you hear footsteps in this room, I can't just offer that up. But if you ask me, did anybody die here? Does anything weird happen? Then I cannot lie about it.
Oh, okay.
In
So
Massachusetts.
That's
Yeah.
just, you know, a more compass too.
That's what I've told everybody. People died there. So.
Yeah.
It would be kind of hard for you to pretend like, you know, oh, yeah, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, but like say if we were in California, if somebody died in the house within the past 3 years, I would by law have to disclose that to you when you ask or
So
not.
it's different places,
Yeah,
different
yeah.
states.
See, that's why it's just smart. If you're going to buy something, just ask. Just make sure you ask. Then you'll know. The thing is, though, is as realtors, you probably have to deal with that whole thing of when people ask,
If somebody
like, you're like, oh, here goes the sale. But in actuality, they're like, oh, no, we want it to be haunted. Like, that's what we're here for. What do you think? We want to buy a creepy old Victorian because we think it won't be haunted? Any other questions? Way back there.
Can you share some of the happenings that you kind of alluded to when you were talking about the Conjuring House?
That have happened to me?
Yeah, that you know about.
Well, so there's been a lot of stories that people have reported there of, you know, shadow figures. And if you're not familiar with a shadow figure, that's these dark figures that show up that have a human outline, but yet have no features. It's like a black mass that's blacker than the darkness around it. Some people think that it's a ghost that can't quite manifest. Other people think that it's its own separate type of being. So there's been a lot of that type of activity there. When I've been there, I had a very strange thing that was going on with my K2 meter, where which a K2 meter is something that will pick up on the electromagnetic field, and then it lights it up. And I was walking around with a flashlight, and every time I shined my flashlight toward where the K2 meter was, the K2 meter would spike all the way. And then when I took my flashlight away, it wouldn't do that. Now, my flashlight is just a mini mag light. It doesn't have any electromagnetic field that should cause that to happen. It runs on AA batteries, but it doesn't affect the device. But it was happening every time. And I called up, Ken DaCosta was there that night, and I called him up there with me, and we realized it was probably maybe that something was moving away from the light when I was shining it, so it was going over toward the K2 meter. So there was something else there that was causing it. But the weirdest thing that I had happen, and I mentioned Cody and Satori and the work that they do at that house, I was very skeptical of this thing that they do where they hold hands, and when they hold hands, these knocks start happening around the room. And that's an old spiritualism thing that's been going on since the 1850s. And I thought to myself, there's a trick to this. And I felt bad thinking that because I love the two of them. I've known them forever, and I don't think that they would ever try to trick somebody. So I'm kind of torn about this, but I'm like, I don't know that I want to see this. So when they were doing it in the downstairs of the Conjuring House, I walked away and I went and did something else. But later on that night, after all of the paying guests had left, it was just a small group of us, including Andrea Perrin, and we're up in the room that used to be her two sisters' bedroom, well, the bedroom of two of her sisters, and Cody and Satori are going to do the knocking thing. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll watch it. And when they were doing it, the knocks were happening, but not over in the vicinity of them like I expected. They were happening, I'm on the other side of the room. They're happening on the ceiling over me, on the wall next to me, on the floor underneath me. And I'm like, this isn't them. They're not the ones making that sound. So something else was doing it, and they were able to communicate. And Andrea started asking questions, and it turned out that it was Andrea's sister who had passed away. And she told them something that only she would have known, that Andrea was able to verify, that Cody and Satori couldn't have possibly known. But this information came through, and it was true. So what's funny is we were at the Ocean State Paracon this year, and it was the big 10th anniversary of The Conjuring. So they had a big panel at the end of it, and somebody asked Andrea, what's the most profound thing that you ever experienced in all your time in that house? And she said, I was there last year, and I was there with Tim Weisberg and Cody and Satori, and she said that experience was the most profound thing that had ever happened to her. And after living there every day for 10 years with ghosts. So I feel very honored that I was able to be there for part of that, and I still feel bad that I questioned Cody and Satori and thought that there was a trick to it. Yes?
There's a place out west called Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
And they have, everybody that goes has, I think, negative experiences, and the government's involved with what has gone on here. There's also a phenomenon called hitchhiker effect. Where these things, whatever they are, follow you and come home with you. Have you ever experienced anything? That would be my concern.
I'll tell you the story of the one time that I think something followed me home.
They can't get rid of them.
I was lucky. I didn't reach that point.
Yeah.
But my friend was not so lucky.
Yeah.
So we investigated the S.K. Pierce mansion many, many years ago when it was still owned by Edward and Lillian at this time. And they actually had a rule, no Ouija boards in the house. But they let me bring in a Ouija board because I'm me. They like me. And also I think because I gave them pizza. But they said, you can bring it in, just be careful with it. We were using it in the basement. Stephanie was there that night and she told me not to use it, that something negative was going to come through. And I was like, cool. So I went down to the basement while I knew she wasn't going to be in the basement. And I was with some friends, including Christy, who runs the Oliver House. And we were using the board, and this spirit came through and said that its name was Laura. And this spirit ended up attaching itself to Christy. And Christy had to have Stephanie help her remove that from her. And it took, I think, a couple of weeks for them to really get it to be gone.
How do you remove it?
You'd have to ask Stephanie that. I don't know. But it's, she, as a psychic medium, she can do things that I can't do. But it took 2 weeks, and then years later, we were going back for the first time to investigate that. And it had already changed hands. And so Stephanie was driving, we were heading up there, and I said, I want to try to reach out to that spirit that was there that night that attached itself to Christy. What was its name? And Stephanie said, I'm not telling you. You're not doing that. I was like, oh, come on. She's like, no. So I sneaky on the side texted Christy, what was the name of that spirit that attached itself to you? And she didn't reply. So we got to the house. And there's a room on the 3rd floor where they say that there's a door that will close on its own. And we went over and we looked all around. We found that in one of the windows there's a little pane of glass that's missing. And that pane of glass would allow just enough breeze to come through that the door would close. So we put some cardboard over it and the door stopped closing on its own. So we thought we had debunked it. Later on that night, we're in that room and we had a bunch of different devices all set up around the room. And I had that Echo Box device going that only has phonetic sounds. And while we're in that room investigating, my phone goes off. And normally you should have your phone in airplane mode when you investigate, but I don't because I'm usually have to be in contact with the other people that are running the event with me. So my phone goes off and I get a text from Christy and all it says is just that name, Laura. So I say to everybody in the room, do you want me to ask if Laura's here? Now again, Stephanie was not in the room. So they said, yes, do it. So I said, Laura, are you here? And as soon as I said that, the door slammed shut. Every device in the room went off full blast, and the Echo Box device kept saying, Laura, 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 over and over again. It's the only time I've ever felt like I'm in a horror movie doing one of these investigations. So we finish up what we're doing, and at the end of the night, we're driving home, and Stephanie's chastising me because she found out that I did it. And we get back to my house, and she tells me, all right, well, before you go in, I want you to say a little protection for her. And I said, no, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't. And she's like, do it just to humor me. So I said, fine, nothing can follow me into the house. And I went to go walk across the threshold into my living room, and I have this device called a REM pod. A REM pod picks up on the electromagnetic field, and it has some flashing lights on it, and it emits a very high-pitched beep. The one that I have is a knockoff of the original design, and the beep that it gives is super annoying. Every time I bring on an investigation, people say, please don't ever bring that back again, because it's just too loud. But I had it in my backpack with some of my other equipment, and I walked across the threshold, and immediately that thing started beeping. And I rip open my backpack and try to pull it out because everybody is sleeping in the house. And what's interesting about it is it's a round cylinder, and half of the bottom of it is hollowed out. So the underneath is where it holds the battery, and where the power button is, you have to reach up to press it. So something would have had to, and this is the bottom of my backpack, so something would have had to have reached up there to press that button. And I said to myself, well, you idiot, this is why you're always supposed to take the battery out of it. But when I flipped it over, the 9-volt battery wasn't in it. I had remembered to take the battery out, and it still went off anyway. So now I keep it locked up in a plastic bin where if it goes off, I can't hear it. So. But that's the only time I think that there might have been anything that came with me to my house. There was another incident where we had done an event at Fort Tabor. We used to be able to investigate Fort Tabor and Battery Milliken. And I was asleep after I got home from the event. Probably got home about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. At about 4:30, I woke up to a horrible Charlie horse in one of my legs. Like it felt like my leg was getting ripped apart. And I got up and I was able to kind of make it fade a little bit. And then I went back to sleep. An hour later, exactly an hour later, 5:30, I woke up, same thing in the other leg. And I was later on, when I, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, whatever, when I woke up for good, I texted Stephanie and I said, hey, this happened to me last night. She said, what time? And I said, 4:30. And she said, I had the exact same thing happen at the exact same time. She didn't get the second one like I did, but she got the first one. So I don't know if that was something like reaching out to us or what, but now I make sure that whenever I investigate, I drink a lot of water and eat a lot of bananas.
There's a lot going on right now with non-human intelligence attributed to orbs and things like that. Do you know anything like that?
No, in terms of orbs, no. I mean, I look at orbs as again, most of the time it's dust or bugs or moisture. But there are some things that go beyond that, things that people see with their own eyes floating around.
If filming, there's someone called Chris Bledsoe, who in government is working with him, who films this phenomenon.
I'm not familiar with his work, I'll have to check it out. You said Bledsoe? Like Drew Bledsoe?
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up. Actually, that does sound familiar, yeah.
But that's a whole different other area, but they have tied in a lot of this paranormal activity with this non-human intelligence. And this is, the UAP now. And they are oftentimes seen with the dead when people have experienced this. So I find it kind of interesting.
Whatever it is, it's making things a little bit thinner in our world, between our world and theirs, or our dimension and theirs, or what have you. Yeah. Yes.
Are all our most shadow figures negative?
I have not found that they are exclusively negative, no. Certainly I've encountered some that are negative, but I used to be like Zach Bagans. I'd walk into a place and be like, come on, ghost, where are you? Come on out. And my personal approach was changed when I was investigating the Murdoch Whitney house in Winchendon. And there was, the Houghton Mansion in North Adams, sorry. I almost told you the story about the ghost I caught in the bathtub that was doing something else. That's a whole different story. No kids in the audience, right? All right, so, but I was in the Houghton Mansion in North Adams, Mass. This is a mansion that was converted into a Masonic lodge. And there was a secret area in the back. And so we were investigating the secret area, and we were watching as shadow people were coming down the hallway. And I was about as far away from the other person as anyone, and this procession of shadow people walked between us. And Alicia was the person on the other side, and she said, I looked at her and I said, Alicia, are you seeing this? And she's like, yes. And as she said that, the shadow person turned and looked at me, and then kept going. So I was like, okay, they're just going about their business, whatever. And then Later on that night, we had one shadow figure at the end of the hall, all the way down there, and we were trying to coax it to come down to us. And it took probably the better part of an hour for it to want to walk down to where we were, but it got about as far away as you and I are right now. And I said, can you give me a fist bump? And I put out my fist like that, thinking that's like the easiest contact to make. And the guy that was investigating with me, Frank, elbowed me in the stomach, and he said, he doesn't know what a fist bump is. Go shake his hand like a man. So I said, all right. I held my hand out, and I said, can you shake my hand? And the shadow figure reached out its hand, wrapped it around mine. I went limp fish to see what would happen, and he just started pumping my arm up and down in a handshake motion. And I'm not afraid to tell you, at that moment, I started crying. I was like very shaken by what it was, because all of a sudden what I thought these things were that I was encountering completely changed. And I went downstairs, and everybody that was part of the event was like, what happened to you? Like everybody could tell like something had changed. And I was like, I don't know that I can talk about it. And it took me a little while before I could kind of communicate to everybody what had happened. But the other people that were in the room saw it happen, and in fact, Frank actually had to shake his hand too. So this really happened. So that's all I can tell you. And it was very positive, and it changed the way that I look, not just at shadow people, but at ghosts overall. To use the cliche, the t-shirt slogan, ghosts were people too. So I kind of felt that way a little bit more about it, and I was a lot more polite. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could quickly review some of the devices that you use
Sure.
to detect things and how they work.
I used to use, actually, you know what? Give me a second. I can actually show you. I used to use a lot of different devices, but I've gotten away from that. And I pretty much exclusively use the EchoVox app now, because I find I get the best reactions from that, and I've gotten stuff that I can't imagine I would have gotten otherwise.
Is that like what Katrina Weidman did?
I don't tell Nick this, but I haven't really watched the show. So let me put this up there. But I know, I mean, I've gotten people to use, there we go. So obviously, you know, these are some of the old school stuff here, like dowsing rods and pendulums. I bring those with me, but I don't really use those. And that's on me, because I don't really have a very steady hand. But I will use those with other people using them and ask the questions. I always have a Mel meter with me or a K2 meter with me. I always keep it like in my back pocket. Not only because you can try to get some communication with it, but because I like to have it in case I need to see if something is leaking EMF. So I can kind of say, all right, we know that if we come over to this corner, there's high EMF for some reason. So if you get any kind of readings over there, that's probably what it is. Gives you kind of a baseline.
What does it emit? Like how does it assess?
It has sensors in it. The problem is they're so poorly made, they're not really high end. If you want to like use something where you can detect EMF in a very scientific manner, you want to use a tri-field EMF detector.
What's the EMF?
Electromagnetic field. So the reason why we think that ghosts are manifesting is because of these environmental changes that they cause. We think that the manifestation is an endothermic reaction. So it's pulling in the heat energy of the room, and that's why we get a cold spot, and that's why we get the electromagnetic field going up, because they're pulling in that heat energy to bring more energy. But then when it disappears, then the temperature goes back to normal and the EMF will go down. So what we're measuring for when we're using these devices is we're looking for changes in temperature and changes in EMF. And the K2 meter will light up when there's a change. The Mel meter will digitally display when there's a change. But those are both kind of not, like a scientist would never use either of those devices to check for EMF anywhere. But a tri-field EMF detector is something that they would use. It just doesn't light up and it doesn't look as cool in the dark, so people don't use them on TV shows. But that's what I'll use to detect that. I'll also usually have a digital thermometer with me, so I can check because the Mel meter also will detect the temperature as well, but the sensor is just a little thing on top of it. I use one of the point and shoot digital thermometers so that I can be that far away from you. Because if you say, hey, it's really cold around me right now, and I come running over with my Mel meter to try to detect it, I'm going to bring my body heat over. So if I can stand over here and I can point and shoot, I can say, well, it's 50 degrees over here, but it's 40 degrees where you're standing. And I can verify that a little bit better. but those are all just to kind of signify the environment around us. What I'm looking for when it comes to communication is getting direct responses and direct answers. So I might make them try to light up some of those devices, but what I really like to use is the Echo Box. And in fact, why not? I'll give you an idea of what that sounds like, because I have it on my phone. I don't use it on my phone, I use it on a tablet. Just gonna leave the session, and just in case a ghost comes through, we want to make sure we have it in there. And what this does is, again, it's every piece of phonetic speech recorded into a sound bank. There's 6 sound banks that are exactly the same. They're just in different voices. So each of the 6 sound banks has every piece of phonetic speech. And then what it does is it randomly cycles through them so that it doesn't stop on a word. Like the odds of it stopping on 2 phonetic sounds that'll make a word are very slim. I get full sentences that come through. And then what we do is we put a little echo and reverb on it to kind of make it stand out a little bit more. And it looks like this. And this is what you hear. So I'll say, oh, let me put it in airplane mode too, just so nothing stray comes in. Is there anybody here with us? Can you say hello? Hello. Can you say hello a little louder, please? My name is Tim. Can you tell me your name? So it takes a lot of listening to this to get kind of used to it. And sometimes it's a lot of stuff that comes through that's not anything at all. But sometimes you get some very, nope, stop. Okay. Sometimes you get some very direct answers to questions.
That's an app on your phone.
It is. So most of the apps that are out there, I will tell you, are junk. Like, don't use them. There's one called the Ghost Detector or Ghost Radar. What that does is that uses GPS coordinates to figure out where you are. So if you use it in the Lizzie Borden house, it's guaranteed that it's going to come up with axe and murder because the people who made that app put those coordinates in there to make it say those words. There's another one called Ghost Hunter Tools, which I'm not really sure, the validity of that. This I like because we were able to pull this all out and look into the back end of it and say, yeah, there's no words in here. Like, we can see everything that's programmed. And in fact, the guy who came out with it just came out with another one in which you can program it the way you want it completely. So you could just take the shell of what he's done and do it yourself so you know what's in there exactly. And which is really cool because I'm going to do it in my own voice.
So you're picking up something in this room?
Maybe. I mean, I just wasn't running it enough. So something might have come through, but I don't know that everybody here signed up for that. Yes.
There's research going on right now with Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona. And they're working, it's called the Soul Zone, and they're working on communicating with each other.
That goes all the way back to Edison.
Yeah.
Edison wanted to create, and some people debate if he was serious about this or not, if it was something he was doing tongue in cheek, but he wanted to create something that he was calling a telephone to the dead. And it was in a 1926, I want to say, edition of Popular Mechanics, where there was a whole article about it. And what happened, the reason why we do things the way we do it now is in the early 2000s, there was a gentleman named Frank Sumption who took that idea and created a way to communicate with these broken radios. He called them Frank's boxes. And what he would do is he would take a radio that had the ability to sweep through the radio waves, like when you sit in your car and you hit seek and it just goes through until it finds the station and then it stops. There's a mute pin in that circuit board. And what the mute pin does is when it finds a signal, it stops it. So if you take the radio and you break off the mute pin, literally physically break it, then it won't stop, it'll just keep sweeping. And so people started using these ghost boxes to communicate with ghosts because they think that these ghosts are communicating with them. And I've had weird stuff that has come through. It's called me by my name, it's called my friends by their names, it's directly answered our questions. It said words that shouldn't be said on the radio. So, in fact, my son will not investigate with me anymore. When he was 7 years old, he went on an investigation with me for the first time. We were in the basement of the Fear and Tavern in Wareham, and he's talking to this ghost box, and he's saying, you know, are you naked? And then he would get like, yes, and he would laugh, and, you know, are you scared? No. And then he said, are you dead? And it came through, and it said, I'll censor it, but it was uncensored. It said, F you. And he looked at me, and at 7 years old, he said, Dad, I know they're not supposed to say that on the radio. I want to get out of here. And that was the last time he ever investigated with me, and he's 19 now. So that was kind of the thing that people would use. In fact, we used it for the first time on TV. We did a show called Conversations with a Serial Killer, where this psychic and this host from England came over, and they brought us into the apartment building that the Boston Strangler supposedly killed one of his victims in. And we were sitting in the room, and we had this radio going, and it's sweeping through, and he's like, Albert DeSalvo, where were you born? Boston. Oh my God, I said Boston. Albert, where did you die? Boston. Like, he was blown away by thinking, like, this is direct answers. Well, we were a block away from Fenway Park, and there was a Red Sox game going on. So the radio is going to keep saying Boston all the time while you're in Boston. So to me, it just creates a lot of false positives. So I don't like to utilize those. That's why I made the switch to Echo Box. And what's funny is Frank Sumption, the guy who created these ghost boxes, these Frank's boxes, he thought we were all nuts for using them to talk to ghosts. Because as he said, they were really used to talk to aliens. That's who he was talking to. And they told him, you look like our beautiful purple princess. And they would describe his voluptuous body and all this stuff. And he believed all of that. Like, his email was like Purple Princess 1939 or whatever. So for him, like, that was the reality of it when everybody else was using it to try to talk to spirits. So I try to avoid the ghost box. That's what this device is over here. This is an SB7 ghost box, which you would just turn it on, put up the antenna, turn it on, and it would just start sweeping through the radio waves. This is Echo Box here. I use that instead. I also use the SLS camera, which is very faulty technology. Somebody came up with the idea, actually Bill Chappell, who invented a lot of these devices, came up with the idea that if you take an Xbox Kinect camera, which is used to map the human body when you're playing those Xbox Kinect games, if you reverse it so that it puts out just the grid of what it's scanning, it creates stick figures on the screen. And so what people, and now the ones that people have out there, including the one that I have, are very like cheaply made knockoffs. But what happens is when you walk into a room and you point it, like, it will pick up all of you as stick figures. But maybe a stick figure appears next to you that isn't somebody that's in the room. Now, that gets a lot of false positives. There's a lot of stick figures that pop up on this thing that just pop up and disappear, pop up and disappear. That doesn't mean there's actually ghosts there. But sometimes you get ones that will interact with you and interact with the environment. When you can actually hold out your hand and say, can you touch my hand? And it reaches out and touches your hand, like in that photo. Or like what happened to me at the Murdoch Whitney house, where there's a music room where there's a piano, and we saw a stick figure show up on the screen standing right next to it playing the violin, tapping its foot. So we had somebody sit at the piano that knew how to play and play the piano, and as it's playing, as it slows down or speeds up, the stick figure is keeping time and tapping its foot in time with whatever the guy is playing on the piano. And then it switched to a floor bass, and then it switched to a trombone, but all while keeping up with what he was doing. But that wasn't, and you can see that on our YouTube channel, but that wasn't the weirdest one we got that night. Is everybody okay if we get a little blue for a moment? Yeah? There's a bathtub in the basement of that mansion, a clawfoot tub that they're keeping in storage. And as we're walking around in the basement with that SLS camera, there's a stick figure sitting in the bathtub with its arms on the side, and there's another stick figure over it kind of washing its back. And my friend happened to catch this and was looking at it and was like, oh, are you a dirty boy? Oh, you need a bath? Like talking in this really cutesy voice. And you see the stick figure take its hand from the side of the tub and just reach down under the water and start washing itself. Just high enough that you knew exactly what it was doing. And then she kept going and she's like, oh my God, you're so naughty. So it started going two-handed. And so we brought this video clip upstairs to everybody else that was in the place, and I said, I'm not going to tell you what we think we see here. I'm just going to play it, and then you tell me what's going on. And I put it on the screen, and everybody started cracking up when I got to that part, and they're like, yeah, no, that's actually what you think is happening is what's happening. And you can see that on our YouTube channel, too. So just be aware that if you type in spooky South Coast masturbating ghost, that just make sure nobody's going into your search history afterwards.
And you don't do it here in public library.
Yes, do not use the library computer to look that up. All right, I think, wrap up, I think,
Just
so,
one,
yes.
are certain people susceptible to getting experiences like that, or can you have a skeptic that has had experiences?
I've had many skeptics who have come along with us of things that have had their minds completely changed. I think it's helpful if you're open to it, but you don't have to be open to it to have it happen to you. The important thing is, once it does happen, then be open-minded about it. Be open-minded about what happened to you, because if you just shut it down completely, you might have just missed the most profound thing that's ever happened to you. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.